Hello, we're live. Welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. I'm Bruce.
I'm Julie.
Okay.
Hello.
And this is episode 70, Speculist versus Specialist. This is the preview for the Realm of Ideas is Free to All, which will be on early Sunday morning at 2 o'clock a.m. And we usually on Wednesday do a preview just to kind of give a header about what's up. Also, special thanks to our friend Stephen, who basically gave us some tips to how to make these things look a little bit more professional, which again,
Thank you, Stephen.
yes, thank you, Stephen. And we are kind of pretty. We understand the idea that we turn the thing on and we can kind of talk, but there's some things we are trying to get more able to do. And Stephen was very helpful. Two things we're looking to do aside from a header, which we know how to do a header,
Yeah, which is great.
which is good. What we'd like to do is while we're speaking, be able to pull images up, pull videos up, and basically show those. One of the things we do regularly is kind of show what's going on with Julie's work. And, we're basically just holding the picture in front of the screen, which is not the most,
not
the best,
great.
but it would be if we could kind of have an image that we then could then, at a certain time in the video, just kind of click on to bring it on. We're not really sure how to do those things, but I guess maybe we just kind of, if somebody knows, we'd appreciate the help.
Sure.
And if, we'll in the meantime, we'll just kind of experiment around.
Yeah.
Anyway,
let's progress.
so these are a series of ruminations that we do. Julie and I have basically been together for 310 years, right? Minus
311
11.
because it's one louder than 10.
Mhm. No, but we've been together for 31 years. It is. It's
That was a
hysterical.
Spinal Tap joke.
It
Come
was.
on.
No, nobody. Again, it dates us.
Ugh.
Anyway, so we've been doing these ruminations about ideas that come to us, and we use the platform to kind of pretty much just run through them in our head. These are ideas that have kind of been working on, kind of been part of the process by which we generate our work, and the work that we do with the kind of interdisciplinary project that we do with our colleagues. So tonight we're talking about a term that Julie invented, which was the speculist, and that's to contrast with the other idea, which is a specialist. Now, we've talked about the specialist before. We also sometimes refer to it as a copyist. But I think one of the things that we found is that I think one of the things that happens is the fact that people become very specific to a very limited task set. And I think what we're seeing is that as we move from era to era, and that's ERA, not ERROR, even though it could be both.
It is not error.
No, it's not. But anyway, as we move to a different, there's the paradigm shifts, and as we kind of move to a different period, I think there's a time in which specialization is going to be kind of like restructured based on what is new, what is to come. And I think technique and speculation are basically the things that create those kind of unbreakable bonds that basically define the next epoch or period. So anyway, I think brief description of what a speculist is. Speculist is anyone who's involved in that kind of like thought aspect of any particular vocation. Those people who kind of try to define those aspects of the horizon, of what the imagination or what the kind of basic premise, the ontology, the epistemology of any particular venue or vocation. So theoretical physics is a kind of speculative venue. Pure mathematics is a speculative venue. Everything, including the law, has a kind of like formative or speculative aspect. Those things basically are the places where you start to see the early formulations or the new formulations that basically will define where you are, where you're going to. One of the things, the terms that we use is kind of like an unbreakable bond. The unbreakable bonds that form at any time and then are maintained through that time are process-based, and therefore can be understood in terms of how they kind of create a particular generation or particular era. Okay, so that's basically what a speculist does. Is they engage in activity in that place. A specialist is someone who has a very specifically defined task, and that task basically is usually kind of set with particular parameters. The speculist, if there's a fixed aspect to the speculist, is just to kind of like live in that imagination at the horizon of what is to come. Anyway.
So a specialist, by their limited compartmentalized nature, is antithetical to an interdisciplinary mindset. And the problem with hyper specialization, which is my term, hyper specialization has bred a particular kind of myopic thinking. And I find that people are far less capable of problem solving than they ever were, because the specialist looks only within the confines of their own, not even their discipline, their specialization within a wider discipline for the answers to their problems. In fact, they generally don't ask questions, they follow the rules, and they generally don't speculate, they carry out. And there's very little imagination, I find, going on in the hyper specialist. In fact, they usually know nothing about what's going on in the rest of the discipline, and absolutely nothing that's going on in tangential or highly related disciplines. It would be like having a mycelium under a mushroom bed and chopping it up into tiny little pieces and sticking each one of those pieces into a pill box and setting them out on a stream and watching them drift away from each other. That is the analogy I'd like you to keep in your minds. That is my view of the hyper specialist.
Yeah, I think, Ortega talks about the specialist, and he talks about them in the kind of pathological idea of how they basically mistake and misuse or are misled by the destiny of a particular generation. So I would say that the shifting of formulation of the speculist actually will redefine the role of the specialist. The specialist role is basically defined by the formation of the generation. And what is interesting is the specialist may feel the change of the destiny of the era through the change in his work as an impression, but he's not basically going to, for the most part, know that. In fact, sometimes he might actually be somewhat disgruntled or kind of like upset by the fact that things are shifting beneath his feet.
Almost always, I think.
Yeah, I think that in a process-based world, the things that define a generation, those things that come to stabilize around a certain thing that have kind of like specific aspects will basically start to kind of like generate a new set of kind of like, formulations for the roles of the individuals. So, there's always going to be people who have to perform tasks. I think what happens is sometimes these people become what I would call, I would say there's a difference between a scientist and a technical service worker. I think what happens is there's some people who basically are engaging in actual research in terms of speculation. And then there are other people who are basically just kind of like, assigned to tasks, and they're kind of like technically, they're doing a technical service. So that to me is the basic definition. Why are we talking about that now? I'm talking about, I think, because as we kind of see the kind of like the shift to a different era, different epoch, a different generation, we start to kind of see the fact that the technique of the specialist is basically just simply an ad hoc series of rules and regulation he uses to perform his task. Whereas the technique of the speculist is that which can actually give you insight into what those kind of formulations for that next era or epoch or generation may actually come to be. So that's it for me in terms of what I think, this situation is about. It's interesting because we've kind of gotten past our 200 subscribers barrier, and it kind of seemed like we blew right through it.
We're sailing along.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I appreciate people noticing is that, like, a lot of times what happens is, the interest and appreciation of what we do, one subscriber at a time, one video at a time, is starting to create a natural organic momentum, which we really appreciate. We appreciate the questions, we appreciate the conversations, and it's become very enjoyable, because it's very heartening when someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, on your last show you said this. What about this and what about that?"
We've had that a lot,
and I think that's kind of starting to happen on a regular basis, and I really do love that. Because I think it expands the conversation. Because again, the whole idea here was to get everyone to understand, we'll talk until someone else wants to join us, and we've enjoyed that conversation as it started to build. Again, thank you to Mr. Spock, who is basically always there with a good question and a kind of like a quick wit. So that's it for me. What else do you have?
Oh, I have lots, but I will just say too that
allergy season.
Oh God, yes. I will say too that we believe in the authentic, organic subscriber experience, and by that I mean our subscribers are actually all real people. They aren't bots. We don't buy subscribers. Our 214 people are actual people.
Yeah, I like that.
And in an artificial age, and I'll be talking about this hyper specialist on our show on, I call it Saturday at 2 a.m. Bruce calls it Sunday, but of a terribly creepy artificial intelligence that has now infiltrated Japanese elementary schools. I will leave it at that because that has, and I will just say one final word about the Speculist. The Speculist is a broadening, expansive, metaphorical thinker. The specialist, the hyper specialist, is never a metaphorical thinker. They are not even an analogistic thinker, and they don't even dwell in the sandbox of similes.
I love that.
So I have to say it again because that was really great. The hyper specialist doesn't even dwell in the sandbox of similes. And we'll talk more about that, but I will leave you with the sourdough bread metaphor I've longed to bring up. This is the perfect time. So the speculist will not only enjoy the loaf of sourdough bread with its dried cranberries, its pecans, its cinnamon, its aniseeds, enjoy the textures and speculate on the pests that had to have been overcome to get the wheat to make the bread. But even better, she or he will yearn to learn the language of the sourdough starter. I'm going to leave it at that.
The realm of ideas is free to all, and it's the benefit of all for us to keep it that way.
And now we're going to get some sourdough bread.